A very good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, shall we start our session on anticipatory action to avert, minimize, and address climate related loss and damage? May I request Farah Appa if you could come to the speaker seat? May I request Jakir, Christina, and Dr. Parfait to join me as a panel? So, a very good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Just trying to juggle between different gadgets that we use nowadays. So, the session on anticipatory action to avert, mitigate, and address climate related loss and damage, which is so crucial when we are here at COP29 and we say that this COP is for finance. This session intends to engage different experts to reflect around the anticipatory action. It will explore the existing gaps and possible solutions to fill the gaps. It will emphasize the importance of inclusiveness in promoting anticipatory action and question the funding mechanism, which is so crucial to meet rapidly some shared objectives. So we have different experts here. We have Jakir, who is from Bangladesh, and he established the Farmers Research Institute with the goal of bridging the gap between researchers, policymakers, and local communities. We have Farah Appa, country director from ActionAid Bangladesh. Sorry, I can't help saying Farah Appa with so much of experience and knowledge that she brings in, and I learned a lot and get inspired. We have Christina. She is the advisor, climate adaptation and advocacy at Helventis Swiss Intercorporation. We have Dr. Perfect, who would bring in the research perspective, and we make sure that these sessions have different expertise sharing their perspective, and it would be a very interesting session discussing the anticipatory actions. So moving on, let me first go to Dr. Perfect, and he would be sharing with us in French. And with my help from my colleague Edeso, he would be helping us in translating. So maybe I'll first go to you with the question. So what are the initiatives that you think could increase the funding and could enhance the anticipatory actions for durable resilience? Over to you.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Et vous m'excusez de m'exprimer également en français parce que je ne parle pas très bien anglais. Et mon nom, c'est Parfait Blalogwe. Je suis enseignant à l'université et en même temps responsable du Centre de recherche et d'expertise pour le développement local. Et la question de la recherche par rapport au système d'alerte précoce est une question fondamentale dans la mesure où le système d'alerte précoce vient à partir du moment où il y a un aléa qui survient. Et si l'aléa survient, ça veut dire qu'on doit pouvoir l'observer et voir un peu toutes les manifestations dans le temps afin de pouvoir savoir comment il faut s'y adapter. Ainsi donc, la recherche a toute son importance à ce niveau-là. Premièrement, d'abord, le but de la recherche, c'est de pouvoir observer et ensuite éclairer les décideurs au niveau individuel comme au niveau communautaire. Donc, dans ce cadre, la recherche a tout son sens dans la mise en place d'un système d'alerte précoce communautaire parce que cela permet de connaître le risque, de connaître ces manifestations, les manifestations du risque, et ensuite de voir les impacts du risque et de voir de quoi les communautés ont besoin pour mieux s'adapter par rapport à ce risque-là. Donc, à partir de ce moment, l'information, oui, tu peux aller.
Okay, so my name is Parfait Blalogwe. I'm a teacher at University of Cotonou in Benin, but I'm also the main responsible of the Center of Research called CREDEL in Benin. The issue of early warning system is generally a very interesting topic to the research simply because early warning system is mentioned because there are some hazards, and when the hazards happen, it's important for the research sector to really observe the way the hazard strike, how it impacts people, and from there pull some conclusion that will guide the decision maker. So the research sector has to observe first of all, but more than that, guide the decision makers because by the observation you understand better risk, you comprehend risk, and then once you know you understand very well the risk, you can also provide some ways forward to minimize or to deal with the risk itself.
Ok, donc cette compréhension du risque, la recherche devra faciliter cette compréhension du risque au niveau des communautés. Et cette compréhension du risque maintenant va amener à savoir quels sont les besoins communautaires qu'il faut pour pouvoir faire face au risque, d'où le système d'alerte précoce. Et l'alerte, si on le met, ça doit pouvoir répondre aux besoins de la communauté. Pour cela, la recherche doit apporter toute l'information nécessaire pour voir d'abord le risque, comment le risque se manifeste, le modéliser et ensuite maintenant passer à l'information climatique ou à l'information d'anticipation pour permettre aux communautés de prendre les mesures nécessaires pour pouvoir faire face aux risques.
So research has to facilitate the comprehension, as I say, but also identify the needs, especially at the local level. Then, through a mechanism of modelization, try to have accurate information that should be provided to the local communities, and then guide the decision that can be done because of those information to make sure that the whole chain of the hazard is well understood by the communities and the right decision is made.
Mercy. Thank you so much for the insightful interventions and really science. With this, we started our session of. Thank you. So we started our session directly on the financing, the anticipatory actions, and Dr. Perfect exactly said why we need science. So now, as I have my colleague Edeso, so I would request him to share about the GNDR work on locally led anticipatory action guide and toolkit. And we have our slides here. I think it's there.
I should use the mic?
This will go back and forth in the...
Yeah, I mean, I don't need this. Listen. Yes. But it's open. Thank you. Now you can hear me, right? Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is, thank you. My name is Kosivia Adesu. Sorry because I was in the negotiation room. That's why I came a bit late. Yeah, COP29 and its challenge. But I would like to share with you some reflections on the early warning system, especially the anticipatory action, from the perspective of GNDR. So on my notes, I said our local communities feel safer when they have the possibility to understand the events that surround their immediate environment and their likelihood to affect their lives. This knowledge leads to comprehending and preparing for early action to avoid or minimize the event's impacts and, where necessary, save their goods and families from the violence of any predicted or suspected events. Prediction and early information is then very key. While prediction is so important, it's also important to ask if it is sufficient. Indeed, information without the possibility to act at the right time is very useless information. Maybe it intends to praise the accuracy of a technology. In another context, we all may agree that it is important to diagnose a specific sickness at earlier stage to prevent the risk of invading a whole body and destroying it. Now, when we talk about anticipatory action, what do we mean? In GNDR, we say anticipatory action refers to action taken to reduce. And when I say reduce, we mean by prevent or mitigate the impact of specific, imminent, forecasted hazard before it occurs or before its most acute impacts are felt. That's what we mean by anticipatory action. Coming to this context here that brought us to Baku, we said climate change impacts are felt differently depending on gender, age, social and economic needs. While the COPs are slow in understanding this and taking measures to really tackle the root causes of climate change, of course, anticipatory action can become the main refuge, especially when it's a need-specific process led at local level. It will give the opportunity to the local actors and the local communities, of course, to have a say in the most pressuring issues that concern them. Anticipatory action, therefore, seems to be an approach leading to shifts from reacting to hazard to acting ahead of them by systematically linking early warning to early actions. Engaging in anticipatory action provides benefits in terms of improved mechanisms and institutional systems. Acting before the onset of a forecast hazard helps to protect the lives and livelihood of vulnerable people around the world. Acting before a hazard becomes a disaster, also help to build people's resilience to future shocks and eases the pressure on strained humanitarian resources. Indeed, any anticipatory action that ignores the capacity of the local actors is simply another action to tick boxes, not to build resilience. An effective anticipatory action can reach several outcomes. In the humanitarian sector, we mentioned the increase of operational capacity to act on forecasts, early warning, and rapid risk analysis. It also can contribute to reduce response costs and time, reduce or transform scale of later humanitarian needs, shifts in humanitarian. In another sector, and when we take the loss and damage sector, which is a very specific topic we are dealing with here, anticipatory action can also help to protect life and maintain dignity. It contributes to protecting livelihood. It helps to avoid losses, faster recovery. It helps to avoid or to mitigate or to reduce physical and psychological suffering. It also contributes in protecting food security and nutrition. And finally, it contributes to strengthen resilience. In GNDR, we have carried out a project called Locally Led Anticipatory Action. You can see it there. And I would like to share with you two findings, two only. The first one is that community-led yearly action approach empowers local structures and community groups to plan and implement their own yearly action using micro grants and through the provision of resources or rapid skills upgrading. So when you provide some very little resources to communities directly, they can organize themselves in a manner that they reduce the main hazards that challenge their daily lives. The second lesson learned or finding is that community-led yearly action can be applied on its own to support community groups and local structures, for example, communities, committees, to take autonomous actions ahead of a forecast or predicted hazardous event or a new spike in crisis. These are the two main lessons we've learned. But to conclude my intervention, we have produced a document that has raised and shared with all those who are interested some of the findings that I would like to invite, especially actors who are intervening at the local level, to go through. And probably you can challenge the findings, but probably they can also help you to improve your actions on the ground. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I request our speakers to please join the panel again. Thank you, Adesso, for highlighting that prediction is key. And the question is, the prediction is important, but if it is sufficient. Thank you for presenting that how anticipatory action could strengthen resilience and how it could be led by the community and we could prevent disasters or extreme weather events impact at the community. Thank you so much for setting the scene. May I request if we could have the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, hearing that we have heard about the Anticipatory Action Guide and Toolkit and GNDR findings, we also heard about Dr. Perfect saying that how the information is very, very important. We have global experts, Farah, Appa, and Christina. But before going to the ladies, may I ask Jakir, what is the state of play of anticipatory action in your country? Because we heard from Adesso that how crucial it is that it should be community-led. So what is your state of play from your country, and what could CSOs could do to implement anticipatory action? Over to you, Zakir.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks, GNDR, to having me here. Well, anticipatory action is new to our community, and it is, so far I understand that the anticipatory action is on piloting phase. So we have to go beyond piloting phase and we have to scale it up, since anticipatory action is the thing that with the activities, with the action, we can avert, minimize, and make resilience better. So, and for me, anticipatory action should be locally led, of course. And any funding for anticipatory actions will go to the local level. So the local people could uh, manage the things to their own context. They can plan their own activities. They can lead their own innovations as well. Let me bring one example. Our community is suffering from salt intrusion due to sea level rise and due to the low water flow from the upstream. The salt water is intruding through the aquifer layer as well as to the surface water level. So when we irrigate with the groundwater, because surface water is gone due to mainly development side effects, so we have to depend on groundwater. And the salt comes with the groundwater through irrigation, and it accumulates into our rice fields. So what we did, and minded that it happened far before Paris Agreement. So what we did some local research that and innovated the solutions, and we are practicing since 2 decades. So if our community have some fund, then we could validate our activities and we could easily scale up it around. So localization of anticipatory actions, anticipatory fund is crucial. And other point is triggers factor. So when we have meteorological data from our government, it says simply it says there could be rain, there couldn't be rain. There will be flood, there will be no flood. There will be high tide, there will be no high tide. That's simple. But as it is becoming more complex and the prediction is becoming more uncertain, so that our community will have to be more be capacitated with early warning systems, and we have to have the satellite image directly to our community, and our school children can analyze the satellite images nowadays. So that's one thing. And with hydrological data, information or data, I think this is one of the crucial factors related to river erosion. And predicting river erosion or modeling river erosion is a complex thing, definitely. But developing countries like Bangladesh, those we have thousands of rivers and streams, we need the modeling to do the modeling. And the community observation is one of the crucial things that could be based on trigger factor. It could be considered as a trigger factor. Yeah. Thank you. Back to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jakir, for giving me the keywords of pre-financing, localization, trigger factor, which clearly helps me to move to our next panelist. So I would now move to Farah Appa. So you have extensive experience working at the global level and connecting the global knowledge you have, connecting it to the national level and also the regional level. So my question to you is, how can the localization of anticipatory action contribute to addressing the vulnerabilities? We already heard that how important it is. It should be community-led. But what would be your key suggestions? Like, how can we localize the anticipatory action to reduce vulnerability?
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are still here and listening. I know it's very late in the day. So the key word for me is it is already led at the local level. And that's my experience. When we started talking about the flooding and cyclone preparedness, we worked with the students. We worked with the women and the community and helped them to prepare. So preparedness and anticipatory action go hand in hand. And one was trying to build up the capacity of the community, right? And we did that through giving them the knowledge, the information, and helping them to deal with it. The other was that you have what is the anticipatory part? The prediction by the meteorological department, telling you that the floods will come or the cyclone may be expected. And in fact, for a long time, they could not predict that the temperatures would rise and the heat would, we would suffer from heat. So now, anticipatory work is about all multiple hazards, multiple disasters. So the suffering is more intensified at the community level and mostly at our pre-urban and rural areas, because they don't have the structure or they don't have the preparedness. So this is where we have to bring in the knowledge and the learning. And when we talk about anticipatory, I think it stretches from enabling the community to move to the shelter, saving their seeds, preserving their seeds, medicines. When we talk to the community, what do you want to do? They said we need a safe space to keep our land documents, our water, and our seeds, because the cyclone will go, the water will recede, we have to go back. So that was as basic as that. Right now, I would say in terms of anticipatory action, it has to start with how you build the structures, your homes, your roads, everything. It has to be a holistic approach. We may think that because we're talking about community level or anticipatory action, so it's about, okay, so you prepare them, they move to the shelter, the disaster passes, and then they go back to. No, it has to be a much more comprehensive thinking. It is about, of course, the first step, which is when the cyclone or the flood hits, what you do. Then you take the second section, how do you cope while it is still there? There's water logging. So you may think that, the lack of water or drought and heat is a problem. For a country like Bangladesh, too much water is also a problem. That water logging is a problem, and it's not safe water. So it is polluted, it comes with its own share. So this is where we have to think about how we preserve our water, how do we store our water, how do we build the structures, how we prepare. So the anticipatory work ranges from A to Z. And is it possible for a government to do? I think it is possible if the government is sincere and there is that cohesion and advanced thinking across ministries and so on. If it remains an issue of power and jurisdiction, then it is difficult. But if the land ministry, the water ministry, the women's ministry, the education ministry, if they could be brought together to sit at the same table, then the anticipatory work would make sense. Otherwise, it is ad hoc. We will respond, we'll prepare them, the community is working, but then if you have 18 disasters in a span of 12 months, what is this anticipatory work? What actually are you preparing? This year we had floods in an area where they have not seen floods in 30 years. So yes, we built the shelters, we built ABC, we did the information, we got the radio station to broadcast. But the people, the community in that area said, we don't know what to do. During floods, we have not seen floods. My father, my grandfather has not seen. What am I supposed to do? And we could not have anticipated that. So this is why we have to remember we are in a situation, in a global situation, where there's so much that we can do in anticipation, and then there has to be the preparedness, and then also the ability to address some of these. So future visioning, future planning is also important. It's part of that anticipatory. And then the investment is critical. Are we investing in this whole exercise? So Bangladesh has many examples. We have, starting from in a disaster preparedness, to working with the World Food Program, to working with UNFPA and UN Women. So different UN agencies are now also looking at anticipatory planning and action. It is something that is catching up, but is it really effective? That is something we need to monitor and see. So I think I would leave it at that. In this whole process, who should be your partners? The women, the youth, the community. They need to be very much a part of it. When we talk about localization, it's not just about the fund. It's also about decentralizing your national processes and procedures and structures. It's about the flow of fund that needs to be also decentralized. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Farah Appa, for bringing in the crucial points like how it should start from the disaster preparedness to response to the long-term recovery that we could do, and it could address the whole of the cycle of disaster management. And also, thank you so much for emphasizing how important it is to take the comprehensive actions and the investment, the crucial point. So with your experience, I'm so into that I want to ask you more, but I think I would ask one more considering that we have some time. Yeah, so from your experience, what are the barriers did you feel or did you experience in implementing the anticipatory action at the local level?
The first barrier is our mindset and our acceptance that we need to go down this path. We've always had floods, we've dealt with it. So it comes from the community, it comes from the bureaucracy, it comes from the policymakers. So there's no reason to think they're all prepared. So we have to invest it's called capacity building of decision makers, government officials, and the communities, absolutely. But I also want to emphasize that we are now investing a lot in capacity building. You cannot do all this if the rest of the world, for them it's business as usual. Your dependency on fossil fuel remains. You're still pursuing a development path which is heavily dependent on fossil fuel energy. And so all our anticipation, all our preparedness actually gets negated. So it has to be parallel action on local, national, global level. We have to look at, adaptation has obviously failed, which is why we are talking about loss and damage. We're talking about all these issues about anticipatory planning and so on. So we need to, there's a limit to how much community can adapt. Mitigation has to be emphasized. And that the mitigation ranges from in all sectors, including methane emission, global, carbon emission, all these have to be addressed. And I think that's how we will be able to work with it. It's about the humans, but it's also about biodiversity and other species.
Thank you, Farah Appa. Thank you so much for highlighting. And I know you have so rich experience, and those are like the real experience that you have shared with us, that what are the barriers that you see on ground. And also thank you for highlighting that it should be required to have parallel actions. So as we are discussing about the country experiences, on-ground experiences from Jakir, and then Farah Appa's rich experience on implementation. So let me move to Christina now. So my question to you is, how can research contribute to sorting out the challenge of the trigger when it comes at the local level? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to reply to that with some findings or with some fruits out of a learning journey that we did within the Swiss NGO-DRR platform. I would not call it research. I would call it experience capitalization. But I think we still had some messages that we can share here that come really from the ground experience. Just in a nutshell, that this Swiss NGO-DRR platform is a network of about 25 NGOs based in Switzerland, but of course working all over the world with its partner organizations. And this network has really the focus on knowledge sharing, learning, and improving our practice of DRR and climate adaptation. So that's the whole focus. And last year we had the topic of weather, water, climate services and what can NGOs do, how can NGOs contribute to strengthen them. We have looked at it in different contexts in many countries and also in many sectors. And one of the sectors or one of the uses of these services was then obviously also anticipatory action. There are others like agriculture, etc., but now we focus here on that. So related to that question also, how can we make it more effective and how do people trust that information that they receive? what we found out is that actually, I mean, the first point is quite basic. People trust what they know and what they know that it works. So if you want to improve that anticipatory action or early warning, early action system, you have to build on existing communication channels, on existing technologies, or wherever needed to introduce new innovations, then do it with a lot of sensitivity and with the necessary time. So it's not about top-down approaches to expect that this would then work. And we have also seen cases where people do absolutely not use weather forecasting. They do the traditional weather monitoring. You even have to work with more sensitivity, and you have to include the traditional weather observation. Even in many cases, it can come to its limits, as also Farah said. There are areas they never had floods. There are areas they never had droughts. So it's difficult to base only on the traditional knowledge to include that. But still, this discussion must be there. And then also, as Jackie said, you need that localized forecasts, and they need to be precise, accurate, reliable. It's so often, it's too generic. You mentioned the cases of too much rain, too less rain. That's useless to inform action. We have all, well, useless, it's not very precise. So let's say it like that. We have also seen cases where at the regional level, there is information coming from a national hydro service that, for example, says tomorrow you will have 927 hectopascal and 35 wind speed, miles per hour. So what do you do with that if you don't understand that? So this transformation, this translation into actionable information, this is absolutely key. And then when you have that, of course, the question of access, who has access to that information? Hopefully it's access to weather information in good times, because when it works then you trust even more when it's really a warning, an alert of a disaster. So it's really to build up the whole weather and climate information system in a region. And then one important question with anticipatory action is the whole issue on thresholds and triggers. And there we have seen that it's really the participatory approaches are key, that people are involved to decide on which hazard do we establish that system. And it's what we have seen quite difficult if you select just one hazard and not the others. So this is not so easy for people then to understand when to act and when not. Regarding the actions to be taken anyway, I think we are on the same page. That is something that has to be locally led and very often is locally led anyway. But then also the definition of triggers. How do you define the trigger when then action starts? If it's like tangible, like for example the river, the level of the rivers, it's much better as it is much easier to understand. We have seen cases where the trigger is based poorly on remote sensing, on satellite data. People do not trust that, and especially where it's not so tangible, and in one village they get the anticipatory action triggered and the neighborhood village not, because the radar data says so. This creates conflict, and I think we all agree that we have to avoid any type of additional conflict in that areas. So these are kind of the main findings we have. Last but not least, maybe a word on digitalization, which is really a high topic, a highly discussed topic. It has, of course, a lot of advantages. But I think we have to be careful with the digital gap. We still have many areas around the world where people do not have smartphones. They cannot use these fancy weather forecasting apps or whatsoever. So there is really, I think we have to do it with a lot of sensitivity. And this is also what we found out, that very often community-based organizations, NGOs, can play an important role to bridge that gap. And there, attention, funding, support could go into that direction. I will leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina, for highlighting the participatory approach and the definition of the trigger. You also shared that people believes in the traditional knowledge, and there is also sometimes that they're getting the early warnings, or they're getting the information but they're not believing it. So what would be your like very quickly in few points, what would you suggest to build the confidence in trigger?
Basically, as I said, to define it jointly, to do a lot of transparent information wherever needed, capacity building including also awareness raising on climate change, because climate is changing a lot than the local weather patterns. And I have seen in many regions where people have not access to that information, do not know what climate change really is. And I think there is a lot that information to be shared. There's a huge difference between different regions, of course. It depends on a lot of factors if this information is available to people or not. But this is key, and information is key for building up trust and then to have the action accordingly.
Thank you so much, Christina. So we have heard the rich experiences and the perspective from our 4 panelists. We also had a presentation on the Anticipatory Action Guide and Toolkit. So I would now like to request our audience, if they have any questions to our speakers, please feel to raise your hand. Yeah, we have one here.
Hello. First, thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your rich experience. And thanks also for the work that you're doing to support people, that is affected the most. My main question is that, what about the role of disaster risk reduction? Because we keep talking about anticipatory action, but this should be the last resort before responding. So first, we need to really work systematically to reduce the risk of reduction. We need to do proper risk assessment, trying to reduce really people's vulnerabilities, increase resilience, and so on. And only if that doesn't work, well, we need to be prepared to anticipate, to have, a final moment of reducing the impact. How do you see it, or do you see it, and that's also part of the question, that it's not really possible to do disaster risk reduction in some of their contexts, and therefore the last resort is anticipatory one. And there is something that some people say happens in places affected by conflict. Personally, I don't believe it. I work on this. I also implement DRR projects in highly intensity conflict settings. And I think DRR is possible, and even better if we have proper DRR than anticipatory action, because it relates with people's livelihoods and so on. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks so much.
You have one more?
Don't worry. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the very enriched sharing of all the 4 panelists. I'm from Nepal. We're also working the preparedness, particularly focusing on community-based preparedness action and then anticipatory action as well. Okay. So most of the difficult part while we are working in the community is about sustainability of anticipatory action. So mostly what happens is that when trigger happens, then only it is almost defined at the government level that the anticipatory action is started. Okay, so it's all about the definition and the concept, like how we are taking anticipatory action is. Okay, and then second is then after the post disaster, post hazard, and all the infrastructure, let's say the training to the community peoples, their action, yes, that has almost been closed. Yes, and then in the next year, when same kind of disaster happens, and again new form of anticipatory action need to be started. New persons should be given training, new setup should be happened. Yes, so all those things. That's why. So it's very crucial to talk about the sustainability of anticipatory action. So what is your idea and suggestions in that aspect?
Do you have any more questions, or we take 3 together? No? Okay, so maybe we start from Christina. Would you like to respond to the 2 questions?
For me, these 2 questions are somehow linked. I mean, in my organization, DRR is a very encompassing approach, and anticipatory action is one element in it. And of course, you always do first try to avoid and prevent, but in many cases, you cannot bring exposure and vulnerability to zero. So then you need anticipatory action to at least mitigate the impact. And in that sense, this links for me up to the sustainability question, because if you do it in that holistic way and also reduce the risk wherever you can and do anticipatory action on the remaining risk, you are as much sustainable as you can be. The anticipatory action as such alone, in my opinion, cannot be sustainable. But of course, you can learn from your action to make it better next time if, again, you have early warning and you have to do anticipatory action. That would be my opinion.
So I think there's a risk that we get lost in these different models and jargons. Why am I saying this? So we had suddenly got repeated cyclones, right? So the disaster risk reduction was to prepare. How do you prepare? You build shelters, you put in, you teach the community that this is your preparedness. This will help you to reduce some of the risk, like water risk, your food risk. You save your seeds, and then when the water recedes. So these were part of it. The government did the calculations on what the disaster risk reduction should be, what pathway to take, right? And if you come to Bangladesh now, the human casualty, which used to be in 100,000s, has come down to 2 or 5, because of all the risk assessment, risk reduction, and preparedness. Now, even one life lost is a life lost, right? So we are celebrating this. And then suddenly, in an area called Feni and Kumilla, you get the floods. That community is so high that no one has engaged with them in the last 30 years because they haven't seen floods in the last 30 years. So there could not be any, they have received the preparedness like everybody else, a very generic one, but there was no anticipatory work there, because you had not anticipated the floods to happen there. You anticipate floods to come in the coastal areas or in the low-lying areas and so on. We are a delta. So what we have to understand is we are in the midst of extreme climate warming and extremities. So our plans and our initiatives are good up to a point. When we talk about sustainability, again, we are caught into this jargon. What is sustainability? When I am having floods 5 times in one area, all the preparedness, anticipatory work, and reduction, the community has to migrate because they have lost their livelihood, they have lost their homes, they have lost their water source, right? So what is sustainability then in this case? The only sustainability I see in this case is the reduction of loss of life. Not 1,000 people died, but 2 people died, but they had to migrate, they had to find a safer place, they had to go and start life all over again. So I'm a bit skeptic about these terms about sustainability. How can we have a sustainable planet when you are not agreeing to bring down your emission and meet the 1.5 degree target? So this is my first point. And I think we can't beat ourselves, to death. We can do that much. But it is about climate change and the fossil fuel dependency and the methane emission. That is where we need to do the work.
Thank you, Farapa. Thank you, Christina. So maybe I'll quickly go to Dr. Perfect. So what would be your response to the 2 questions from a researcher perspective?
Okay. Merci beaucoup de ma compréhension. Je voudrais quand même dire que la réduction des risques de catastrophe passe par 3 ou 4 phases. La toute première, c'est d'abord la prévention, c'est de faire en sorte que le risque ne survienne pas. Donc, dans nos constructions, dans nos activités quotidiennes, on prend en compte le risque pour minimiser son apparition. Mais lorsque on fait tout ça et qu'on n'arrive pas à minimiser le risque pour que cela n'arrive pas, on se met dans la phase de la prévision. Là, on commence par surveiller le risque. Et quand on le surveille maintenant et on est sûr que le risque va apparaître, Là, on se met dans la préparation. C'est en ce moment que l'alerte arrive pour pouvoir dire, malgré tout ce que nous avons fait, le risque va arriver, alors prenez vos dispositions. Donc voilà, ce n'est pas parce qu'en parlant d'alerte, on a oublié les phases antérieures, mais on a dû mener des actions, mais qui ne nous ont pas permis de maîtriser le risque. Oui, Adissou.
Sorry, I'm speaking French now. Dr. Parfait said that the disaster management is split in 4 phases. So the first one is about prevention. Preventions, then we go to prevision, because you work on the prevention with the spirit that this will not happen, or when it's occur, then the risks are really, really low. If it doesn't work, then you go to the prevision. With the prevision, at the level of the prediction, we say in English, you monitor the risk to some extent. Then you go to the preparation step, the preparation level, which is now you sure that something will happen. Then you start preparing the communities, you give the information, you provide the climate information, and that's the time where you throw you trigger, or you put the alert. Alert is there. Then you give the alert saying, look, this can happen, and then after the alert, people will start implementing what we call by yearly action or anticipatory action by getting ready, so that they can minimize the impact of the hazard and make sure that or preventing the hazard to become a disaster.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mercy.
If you have time, Jacqueline.
Yeah. I'm coming to you. So I would request you to answer those 2 questions from a farmer's perspective.
Well, I would like to. I believe that Farah, Christina, and Dr. Perfect has answered both the questions. I would like to add one point, that is risk-informed development. It is quite related to anticipatory action and also disaster risk reduction, because let me bring one more example from our community. We had a canal, and due to risk non-informed development, it's gone. So during flood, our whole community is stuck, waterlogged, and our crops is gone. So what is our strategy now? We don't have the capacity to renovate the canal anymore. We did once anyway. So we predict the flood, and we changed our cropping pattern. Simply change our cropping pattern. That's our action. So risk-informed development is crucial, very crucial. Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing in the risk-informed development. So we so strongly advocate and always strongly say to our members that we really need to work on the risk-informed development. And also in our advocacy messages, we strongly mention about the risk-informed development. We just have 4 minutes, but I'm so obliged to ask just one, if we could just take 2 minutes each, just to say, I would like to ask you actually, not to say it, to ask our panelists, how can the policy and funding mechanism could integrate anticipatory action in the scope of traditional funding? The question is, how can the policy and the funding mechanism could integrate anticipatory action in the scope of traditional funding?
Comment est-ce que le mécanisme de financement actuel prend en compte les questions d'action anticipatoire dans le financement? Donc, comment est-ce qu'on intègre les questions d'action anticipatoire dans le mécanisme traditionnel de financement?
Oui. Par rapport au mécanisme traditionnel de financement, c'est déjà ce que nous venons de dire précédemment. Lorsque nous parlons de développement et que nous voulons mener les actions de développement, il s'agit de voir dans quelle mesure nos actions de développement accentuent ou minimisent le risque. Donc, qui veut financer le développement doit financer forcément la réduction de risque. Quand je prends un exemple très simple de ce que nous vivons dans nos villes, actuellement, c'est la question d'inondation qui apparaît tout le temps. Mais lorsqu'on décide de construire, par exemple, des voies pour faire le développement, la construction de voies intègre la construction de collecteurs de drainage des eaux pluviales. Donc, on peut dire que le financement qui a servi à la construction de voies, ce financement sert également à la réduction des risques de catastrophes.
So the first part of my answer is we need to make sure that our development action also contribute to reducing disaster risk. And he gave a very concrete example. If you want to build a road, for example, in a street, you need to make sure that that project, that is a development project, integrates the DRR dimension. So again, coming from him, our projects, our development project can contribute to enhancing vulnerability or decreasing the vulnerability. And we need to respond to that question before we start the development program itself.
Oui, lorsque nous voyons et nous prenons le cas, par exemple, du fonds dont on discute actuellement, le fonds sur les pertes et dommages, forcément, ce fonds va pouvoir intégrer les questions de réduction de risque en amont, puisque personne ne sera attendre pour dire, bon, j'attends, c'est le jour où le risque survient que je vais débloquer énormément de fonds pour aller secourir les gens. Ça ne devrait pas être forcément cela. Donc, cela veut dire que d'une part, ils vont mettre de l'argent en amont pour faire en sorte que le risque n'arrive pas. Ce qui intègre également les questions d'adaptation. Lorsqu'on parle de l'adaptation et qu'on met de l'argent dans l'adaptation, ça permet de financer également les systèmes d'alerte précoce qu'on observe également de nos jours. Donc ça veut dire que ces financements-là arrivent déjà à intégrer la question de réduction de risque de catastrophe.
So the loss and damage fund that we are talking about here should take into consideration the issue of anticipatory action somehow, because we should not wait for the hazard to become a disaster before we intervene, but resources are made available to deal with any hazard that may tend to become a disaster. That's how also our development project should function, by making sure that our development process integrates more and more vulnerability disasters to minimize the impact of this initiative on the communities.
Donc, je finirai pour dire que en amont, quelqu'un a dit désormais, autant on fait les études d'impact sur l'environnement des projets de développement, autant on va commencer par faire l'étude de risque sur les projets de développement pour prendre en compte les risques avant la mise en œuvre des projets.
To end my response, I would say, as we promote the environmental studies on development projects before we implement them, it's time to also conduct some risk assessment before we implement every development project, to make sure that we minimize the likelihood to expose people to vulnerabilities.
That's it.
Thank you so much for answering that in detail. But quickly checking on other speakers if they want to respond to the question. Yeah, Christina?
I would fully agree that there is really an increased awareness that climate disaster environment risk assessments are key in any activities, and it's, maybe we can say it's still slow, it's still not enough, but it's more and more taken into account. And from the finance actors, I know there is an increasing obligation to integrate that. But I'm a little bit, I don't know what to think about, because first you said we have these different concepts, DRR, anticipatory action, etc. Yeah.
Be under one.
Exactly, it should be like under
It's
one.
all part of the same.
Exactly. That. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's how funding is positioned. But for the community, it's not separate.
For the community, it's definitely not separate.
And even
I
for
fully agree.
policymakers, it's not separate. Which is why I'll just add one point after Christina's finished.
No, it's just, for me, it's a question mark if it makes sense to also ask the loss and damage fund to finance everything else that is already financed by adaptation fund, that is already financed by humanitarian money. I think we have to be careful in the discussion and a little bit distinguish what is for what purpose.
I 100% agree with her that loss and damage fund needs to be separate from adaptation and mitigation fund. But I just want to leave you with one, this is in anticipation. Now we are talking about moving to renewable energy, and we're talking about solar, and we're talking about others. And by just having that word, environment impact assessment can be compromised. Because, you know, you can go to the government or the regulatory authority and say, I'm going to do something around solar. And they, without actually doing an assessment of the sustainability and viability and, impact, they're kind of, everyone's jumping into the wagon. So we also have to be careful that environment impact assessment, climate assessment, risk assessment, it should now be an integral part of any planning, whether it is your development planning or whether it is your response planning. I think we need to be careful. And that's why I raised this, that they try to segment it. They try to put pieces here and there and give you funding, but that's not going to work. We need to see the full picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the honest discussion and sharing your risk perspective. With this, I would like to thank you everyone for joining us as a panelist and also joining us as our audience. Thank you so much and have a great evening ahead.